And joining me in the studio is our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, not as many protests in the streets across China, so is this a sign that the crackdown has well and truly begun?
Yeah, there's a snuff out beginning. And, you know, Xi Jinping might actually succeed in snuffing out these protests faster than Vladimir Putin snuffed out the anti-war protests in Russia, doing it in his own way. Look, we've had sort of a double whammy here. We've had, the security, the presence, the police presence on the streets. Wherever the protesters had gathered, we saw it in Beijing, Shanghai. We've had these blue walls and gates erected along the main streets in the big cities where the protesters had gathered. A shot across the bow, a warning for would-be demonstrators. You can come back, but you do so at your own risk. Also, the censorship. You don't have any of the state news outlets using the word protest. Xinhua News Agency hasn't mentioned the word protest once in any of its stories since the protests erupted. Police at metro stations checking people's mobile phones for images, anything to erase them, to basically snuff it all out. So the internet clampdown also alongside the security presence, that is clearly deterring people across China. So it may actually end as quickly as it began.
And in the meantime, Hong Kong is seeing protests again.
Yeah, Hong Kong, this is interesting. Hong Kong really seeing serious protests for the first time in more than a year. You'll remember the big pro-democracy protests, 2019. What was the fate of those? Well, there was the clampdown, and they were crushed, essentially, by the security forces in what had been a pretty freewheeling democratic former colony of Britain, and snuffed out. And you haven't really had any big street demonstrations in Hong Kong in the past couple of years, since 2020. What you had is two gatherings, one by the Chinese University of Hong Kong. You had students gathering, actually, several dozen of them, singing. What were they singing? They were taking one of the theme songs from Les Miserables, Do You Hear the People Sing? Almost like singing the Marseillaise. So that was, you know, sort of a show of defiance. And then meanwhile, in one of the busiest areas of Hong Kong, the central, appropriately named business district, you had dozens of protesters, some carrying flowers, some carrying those symbolic and emblematic white sheets of paper, which sort of stand for a metaphor for we can't speak, we're stifled, we're silent, holding them, sometimes hiding their faces, but still turning out. Hong Kong, the fact that you're having those stirrings of protests, in many cases with students from the mainland studying in Hong Kong, it's very significant. So whether it will lead to anything, probably not, because they're also under that national security law and that clamping down in Hong Kong.
Now, the authorities are not backing down, but they are, on the other hand, easing COVID restrictions, aren't they?
Yeah, but that comes with a big caveat. I think the main thing to emphasize is the authorities have made crystal clear in it they are sticking to their guns. They are not scrapping their zero COVID policies. They're not heeding the voice of the protesters, the will of the protesters. But yes, a few, and I have to say a few concessions. In Beijing, they will no longer, they said, be setting up gates to bar access to buildings where COVID infections are found. So it was preventing people from getting in, but also for people from getting out. They had padlocks on gates in some cases. Those are gone. In Guangzhou, manufacturing hub, trade center, the residents will no longer be required to do mass testing on a daily basis. And can you imagine if you had to go for a test every single day, how much pressure that puts on you? That's what's been going on in China. So they're going to ease down on that just a little bit and in only certain areas. And finally, in Urumqi, one of the key cities where that fire that triggered these protests occurred, the markets are going to, basically shopping markets, are going to open if they only have a low risk, what's seen as a low risk of COVID infection sort of situation, as are businesses. Businesses will be allowed to resume practice soon. It used to be that anything, you had one case, everything was shut down. Now they're going to try to have a gradation here. If it's a low risk, they'll let you work. But still, I have to emphasize, these are tiny concessions in the realm of people's pent-up anger and frustration with zero COVID policies.
Doug Herbert, thank you so much.